The widow Eleanor Walsh stood at the edge of her late husband's grave with dirt under her fingernails and blood on her conscience, knowing that some secrets were better left buried 6 feet under the Arizona soil. The November wind of 1881 whipped across Vulture City, carrying with it the scent of creosote and the distant sound of hammers against rock as miners worked the claims that dotted the unforgiving landscape. She had been standing there for an hour, her black dress gathering dust, her mind replaying the moment she had failed to save him. Thomas had been a good man, perhaps too good for a woman like her. When the fever took hold 3 months ago, she had tried everything within her limited knowledge of medicine. She had cooled his brow with wet cloths, forced water between his cracked lips, prayed to a God she was not certain was listening. But in the end, she had made a choice that haunted her every waking moment. The laudanum bottle had been in her hand, and she had measured out what she thought was the right amount to ease his suffering. Only it had not been the right amount. She had given him too much, and his labored breathing had stopped in the quiet hours before dawn. No one knew. The doctor had signed the death certificate without question, attributing Thomas's passing to the fever that had claimed 3 other souls in town that same week. But Eleanor knew the truth. Her trembling hands had ended his life, whether through mercy or incompetence, she could not say. The guilt sat in her chest like a stone, heavy and immovable. She turned away from the grave finally, her modest home visible in the distance. The small wooden structure sat on the outskirts of Vulture City, isolated from the main thoroughfare where the saloons and general stores clustered together. Thomas had built it himself when they arrived 2 years ago, dreaming of making a fortune in the gold mines. Those dreams had died with him, and now Eleanor faced an uncertain future. She had no family, no income, and winter was coming to the high desert. The walk back to the house felt longer than it should have. Her boots crunched against the rocky soil, each step a reminder that she was still alive while Thomas lay cold in the ground. As she approached the fence line, she noticed movement near her small barn. A man was there, tall and lean, working on something she could not quite make out from this distance. Her heart quickened with alarm. Strangers were not uncommon in mining towns, but a lone woman had to be cautious. She reached for the revolver she kept in her dress pocket, her fingers closing around the grip as she drew nearer. The man must have heard her approach because he straightened and turned, his hands visible and empty. He was young, perhaps in his late 20s, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of strong coffee. A worn hat sat on his head, and his clothes marked him as a working man, a cowboy by the look of his boots and the way he carried himself. "Madam," he said, removing his hat in a gesture of respect, "I did not mean to startle you. I was passing through and noticed your fence was down in 2 places. Thought I would mend it before any livestock got out." Eleanor kept her hand in her pocket but did not draw the weapon. "I have no livestock." He glanced toward the empty corral and nodded. "I see that now. Still, a good fence is important. Never know when you might need it." "I did not ask for your help." "No, madam, you did not." He held her gaze, and something in his expression was open and honest. "Name's Owen Lawson. I have been working cattle drives up from Texas, but I am looking to settle somewhere more permanent. Heard there was work in the mines here." "The mines are dangerous and the pay is poor," Eleanor said, though she did not know why she felt compelled to warn him. "Men die in them regularly." Owen nodded slowly, turning his hat in his hands. "I appreciate the honesty. Truth is, I am better with horses and cattle than I am with a pickaxe, but I will do what work I can find." He paused, studying her face with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "You are Mrs. Walsh, are you not? I heard in town that your husband recently passed. I am sorry for your loss." The words were simple but seemed genuine. Eleanor found herself relaxing slightly, though she kept her guard up. "Thank you. Now if you will excuse me, I have things to attend to." "Of course." Owen stepped back, giving her space. "I will just finish this section of fence if you do not mind. No charge. Consider it a neighborly gesture." She wanted to refuse, to send him away and maintain the isolation she had wrapped around herself like armor, but something stopped her. Perhaps it was the kindness in his eyes, or perhaps it was simply exhaustion. "Do as you wish," she said finally, moving past him toward the house. Inside, the silence pressed against her ears. The main room was sparse, containing only a table, 2 chairs, a stove, and a narrow bed in the corner. Thomas had promised they would buy better furniture once the mine paid off. Another broken promise, another reminder of failure. Eleanor removed her bonnet and set it on the table, then moved to the stove to start a fire. Her supplies were running low. She had flour enough for another week, some dried beans, and a bit of salt pork. After that, she would need to find work or sell something of value. The problem was she had little of value to sell. Through the small window, she could see Owen working on the fence. His movements were efficient and practiced, the work of someone who knew what he was doing. She found herself watching him longer than she should have, drawn by the simple competence of his actions. When was the last time someone had done something for her without expecting payment or favors? She could not remember. The afternoon wore on. Eleanor busied herself with small tasks, mending a tear in her only other dress, sweeping the floor, organizing the meager contents of her cupboard. All the while, she remained aware of the man outside. When the sun began its descent toward the distant mountains, she made a decision that surprised her. She prepared a simple meal of beans and cornbread, making more than she needed. She stepped outside just as Owen was finishing the last repair. "You have been working for several hours," she said, her voice formal but not unkind. "I have made supper. You are welcome to share it as payment for the fence work." Owen looked up, surprise evident on his face. "That is generous of you, madam, but not necessary. Nevertheless, I insist." "I do not like being in debt." He smiled then, a genuine expression that softened the hard lines of his face. "Well, in that case, I would be honored." They ate at the small table, the meal simple but filling. At first, neither spoke much, the silence awkward but not hostile. Eleanor found herself stealing glances at her guest, noting the calluses on his hands, the way he ate slowly and with appreciation, as if good food was not something he took for granted. "How long have you been traveling?" she asked finally, breaking the quiet. "Near about 6 months," Owen replied, setting down his fork. "Left Texas after my father passed. The ranch went to my older brother, which was right and proper, but it left me without much purpose. Figured I would see what else was out there." "And you chose Arizona?" he shrugged. "Chose is maybe too strong a word. I drifted, took work where I could find it, ended up here because my horse needed rest and I needed a place to think." "About what?" Owen met her eyes, and she saw something vulnerable in his expression. "About what kind of man I want to be. About whether I want to spend my life following someone else's orders or if I want to build something of my own." Eleanor understood that sentiment more than he knew. She had spent her life following the paths laid out by others, first her father, then her husband. And where had it led her? To a small house on the edge of nowhere, carrying guilt that would follow her to her own grave. "It is a difficult thing," she said quietly, starting over. "Yes, madam, it is." He paused, then added, "but sometimes necessary." They finished the meal, and Owen insisted on helping clean the dishes. Eleanor found his presence oddly comforting, a break in the monotony of grief and isolation. When the work was done and the last light faded from the sky, he thanked her again for the meal and moved toward the door. "Where will you stay tonight?" she asked, surprised by her own concern. "I have a bedroll. I will camp somewhere outside town." She knew she should let him go, should maintain proper distance and propriety. But the thought of being alone again, surrounded by silence and guilt, was suddenly unbearable. "The barn has a loft," she heard herself say. "It is not much, but it is dry and warmer than sleeping under the stars." Owen studied her face for a long moment. "Are you certain?" "I do not want to impose or cause talk. People will talk regardless of what I do or do not do. The barn is empty and serves no purpose. You are welcome to use it. Then I accept with gratitude." He retrieved his bedroll and saddle from where he had left them near the fence, and Eleanor showed him to the barn. The structure was indeed empty, the loft dusty but serviceable. "There is a pump outside for water," she told him. "And if you need anything else, the house is just there." "Thank you, Mrs. Walsh. You have been kinder than I had any right to expect." She nodded and turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Madam, if I may ask, what happened to your livestock? Did you have to sell them after your husband passed?" Eleanor felt the familiar weight settle on her chest. "We never had much. Thomas was a miner, not a rancher. We had 2 chickens and a milk cow, but they died during a cold snap last winter. We never replaced them." "I see." Owen's expression was thoughtful. "Well, good night then." "Good night, Mr. Lawson." Back in the house, Eleanor lay in her narrow bed and stared at the ceiling. She could not remember the last time she had engaged in such an extended conversation with anyone. The women in town treated her with polite distance, unsure how to approach a widow. The men either leered or avoided her altogether, seeing her as either a potential conquest or a reminder of mortality. Owen had done neither. He had simply been present and respectful. She closed her eyes and tried not to think about Thomas, about the moment his breathing had stopped, about the silence that had followed. But the memories came anyway, relentless and unforgiving. If only she had measured more carefully. If only she had waited for the doctor. If only, if only, if only. Sleep came eventually, fitful and punctuated by dreams she could not quite remember upon waking. The next morning, Eleanor rose with the sun, as was her habit. She was surprised to see smoke rising from outside, and upon investigation, found Owen had started a fire and was heating water in a battered pot. "Morning, madam," he said, looking slightly embarrassed. "I hope you do not mind. I am making coffee if you would like some." The smell alone was worth any breach of propriety. "I would, thank you. I ran out of coffee 2 weeks ago." They sat on upturned crates near the fire, drinking the strong brew and watching the sun paint the desert in shades of gold and pink. It was, Eleanor realized, the first peaceful morning she had experienced since Thomas died. "I have been thinking," Owen said after a while. "You mentioned yesterday that you have no livestock. Have you considered what you will do now? I do not mean to pry, but a woman alone needs income." Eleanor had been thinking of little else. "I have some skills with sewing and mending. I thought I might offer services in town." Owen nodded. "That is good work. But this property, it has potential. With some investment you could have chickens again, maybe some goats. A garden would do well here if you could get water to it. Investment requires money, Mr. Lawson. That is something I do not have." "No, but you have land and a barn and a house, and I have some saved wages and a strong back." He held up a hand before she could protest. "I am not suggesting anything improper. What I am saying is this. I need a place to stay while I figure out my next move, and you need help getting this place productive. We could come to an arrangement. I work the land, help you establish some income, and in exchange, I have a place to sleep and meals. When I have saved enough to move on, or if you no longer need help, we part ways." It was a practical suggestion, and yet Eleanor hesitated. Having a man on her property, even one as seemingly decent as Owen Lawson, would certainly cause talk. But then, what did she care about talk? She was already isolated, already marked by widowhood and poverty. "Why would you do this?" she asked. "Surely there is better work to be found elsewhere." Owen took a long drink of his coffee before answering. "Honestly, I am tired of drifting. I want to be useful, to build something, even if it is not my own. And you seem like someone who could use a friend, though maybe that is presumptuous of me to say." A friend. When had she last had one of those? "It is not presumptuous," she said quietly. "It is observant." "So we have an agreement," Eleanor considered for another moment, weighing practicality against propriety and finding that practicality won. "We have an agreement." "But Mr. Lawson, I must be clear about something. This is strictly a business arrangement. I am in mourning and not looking for any kind of romantic entanglement." "Understood completely, madam. You have my word as a gentleman." They shook hands on it, his grip firm and warm, and Eleanor felt the first small spark of hope she had experienced in months. Over the following weeks, Owen proved himself invaluable. He rode into town and returned with 4 chickens and a rooster, purchased with his own money despite Eleanor's protests. He repaired the coop, strengthened the barn walls, and started work on a proper garden plot. Eleanor, for her part, took in mending work from town and began the slow process of rebuilding her finances. They fell into a routine that felt almost natural. Owen would work the property during the day while Eleanor handled household tasks and her sewing work. They would eat meals together, sharing simple food and simpler conversation. Slowly, carefully, they began to know each other. Eleanor learned that Owen had served briefly in the army after the war ended, though he never saw combat. She learned that he loved horses with a passion most men reserved for women or gold. She learned that he had a dry sense of humor that occasionally caught her off guard and made her laugh, something she had thought she might never do again. In turn, Owen learned that Eleanor was educated beyond what was common for women of her station. Her father had been a schoolteacher before he died, and he had insisted his daughter read everything she could. Owen learned that she had married Thomas more out of necessity than love, though she had cared for him deeply. He learned that she carried a sadness that went beyond normal grief, though she never explained its source. One evening in early December, as they sat by the fire after supper, Owen brought up something that had clearly been on his mind. "You know, Mrs. Walsh, folks in town have been asking about me, about us." Eleanor stiffened. "What have you told them?" "The truth. That I work for you in exchange for room and board. But I think you should know there has been some unkind speculation." "I assumed there would be." She kept her voice steady, though anger simmered beneath. "People always find ways to condemn a woman for surviving. It does not bother you." "What they say, it bothers me," she admitted. "But it does not change my circumstances. I need help, you provide it, and what the gossips think is irrelevant to my survival." Owen smiled slightly. "You are stronger than you give yourself credit for." "I am surviving." "That is different from strength." "I disagree. Strength is not about never falling down. It is about getting back up every time you do." His words settled over her like a blanket, warm and unexpected. She found herself looking at him, really looking and seeing not just a hired hand but a man of principle and kindness. It frightened her, that observation, because she had promised herself no entanglements. And yet here one was, growing without her permission. December brought colder weather and shorter days. The chickens were laying well, and Eleanor had begun selling eggs in town along with her mending services. It was not much, but it was enough to keep them fed and slowly build a small reserve. Owen had started talking about getting a milk cow in the spring, about expanding the garden, about building a proper workshop where Eleanor could do her sewing in better light. It all sounded wonderful and terrifying because it sounded like a future, and Eleanor was not certain she deserved one. The guilt she carried had not lessened. If anything, it had grown sharper as her circumstances improved. How dare she find comfort when Thomas lay in the ground because of her actions? How dare she enjoy Owen's company, look forward to their evening conversations, feel her heart quicken when he smiled at her one night? The guilt overwhelmed her. She lay in bed, tears streaming silently down her face, and thought about confessing everything to Owen. About telling him what she had done, how she had ended Thomas's life with her own hand, even if unintentionally. But fear held her tongue. What if he looked at her with disgust? What if he left and she was alone again? The next morning she was quiet at breakfast. Owen noticed, of course. He seemed to notice everything about her. "Are you well?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "Just tired," she lied. He did not push, though she could see he did not entirely believe her. They went about their separate tasks for the day, but Eleanor could not shake the heaviness that had settled over her. By evening, she had made a decision. She could not continue carrying this secret alone. She needed to speak it aloud, even if it meant losing the only friend she had. After supper, as they sat by the fire, Eleanor took a deep breath and said, "Mr. Lawson, there is something I need to tell you, something about my husband's death." Owen set down the cup he had been holding and gave her his full attention. "You do not have to tell me anything you are not comfortable sharing. I know, but I need to say this. I need someone to know." She clasped her hands together to stop them from shaking. "Thomas did not just die from fever. I killed him." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and damning. Owen's expression did not change, which somehow made it worse. "Go on," he said quietly. So she did. She told him everything about Thomas's suffering, about her desperate attempt to ease his pain, about the laudanum and her shaking hands and the terrible silence that followed. She told him about the guilt that ate at her every day, about how she could not forgive herself, about how she felt she had no right to any happiness or peace. When she finished, tears were streaming down her face. She waited for Owen to stand to leave, to tell her she was a murderer, and he wanted nothing more to do with her. Instead, he reached across the space between them and took her hand in his. "Eleanor," he said, using her given name for the first time, "you did not kill your husband. You tried to help him and you made a mistake in dosage. That is not murder, that is tragedy. I should have been more careful. I should have waited for the doctor. Maybe, but you were exhausted and frightened and watching someone you cared about suffer. You did what you thought was right in that moment." He squeezed her hand gently. "You have been carrying this guilt like a stone, letting it crush you, but you do not deserve that burden. How can you say that? You do not know what it is like to have someone's death on your hands." Owen was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was thick with old pain. "Actually, I do. I told you I served in the army after the war, but I did not tell you everything. I was involved in operations against Apache groups in Texas. We were ordered to clear an area to remove anyone we found. I was young, following orders, trying to be a good soldier." He paused, his jaw tight. "We came upon a camp. There were warriors, yes, but also women and children. The order was given to fire, and I did. I shot a man who was trying to protect his family. He could not have been much older than I was. I think about him every day, about the fear in his eyes, about the woman who screamed when he fell." Eleanor felt her heart clench. "Owen, I am so sorry. I tell you this not for sympathy, but so you understand that I know about guilt. I know about carrying the weight of death. And I know that the only way forward is to accept that we are human, that we make mistakes, and that those mistakes do not define our entire existence. How did you find peace with it? I have not entirely. But I have learned to live with it, to try to do better, be better, help where I can. That is all any of us can do. They sat in silence for a while, hands still clasped. Eleanor felt something shift inside her, not a complete release of guilt, but perhaps the beginning of forgiveness. "Thank you for telling me," she said finally, "for trusting me with your story. Thank you for trusting me with yours." That night marked a change in their relationship. The formality between them eased, replaced by something deeper and more genuine. Eleanor still called him Mr. Lawson in public, but in private, they used given names. They talked more openly, sharing not just daily observations but deeper thoughts and feelings. Eleanor found herself looking forward to evenings by the fire, to the sound of Owen's voice, to the way he looked at her as if she mattered. Christmas came and went quietly. Owen surprised her with a small gift, a bolt of blue fabric he had purchased in town. "I thought you might like something pretty," he said, almost shyly. For a dress, maybe. Eleanor had not owned anything pretty in years. She ran her fingers over the soft cotton, touched beyond words. "This is too much," she managed to say. "It is not nearly enough," Owen replied, and something in his tone made her look up sharply. He was watching her with an expression she had seen before but had not let herself acknowledge. It was tenderness mixed with longing, affection mixed with respect. It was the look of a man falling in love. Her heart began to race. "Owen, we agreed this was a business arrangement." "We did," he acknowledged. "And it still is if that is what you want. But Eleanor, I cannot help how I feel. You are the strongest, most resilient woman I have ever met. You have faced tragedy and guilt and hardship, and you are still standing, still fighting, still finding ways to be kind despite everything. How could I not admire that? How could I not care for you?" Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. "I am not who you think I am. I am broken and guilty, and I do not know if I can ever be whole again." Owen moved closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "We are all broken in some way. That does not make us unworthy of love." "Love," the word came out as barely a whisper. "Yes, love." He reached up and gently wiped a tear from her cheek. "I love you, Eleanor Walsh. I did not plan it, and I know it is inconvenient and maybe even unwelcome. But it is true." She should push him away. She should remind him that her husband had been dead only 5 months. She should protect herself from the vulnerability of caring for someone again. But she was so tired of being alone, so tired of carrying everything by herself. "I am afraid," she admitted. "Of what?" "Of this. Of losing someone again. Of hurting you or disappointing you, of not being enough." Owen smiled gently. "You are more than enough. And yes, love is frightening. It is a risk, opening your heart to someone. But Eleanor, it is also the most beautiful risk we can take." She looked at him, this good man who had appeared in her life when she needed him most. This man who had seen her at her worst and stayed anyway. This man who had shared his own darkness and not judged her for hers. "I care for you too," she said finally. "I have tried not to, but I do. You make me feel less alone. You make me think that maybe, possibly, I deserve to be happy." "You do deserve it. You deserve everything good. Even though I caused someone's death, you made a terrible mistake while trying to help someone you cared about. That does not make you a monster. It makes you human." Eleanor felt something break open inside her, a dam that had been holding back months of grief and guilt and loneliness. She stepped forward, closing the distance between them, and let Owen pull her into his arms. She cried then, truly cried, and he held her through it all, steady and strong. When the tears finally subsided, she pulled back enough to look at him. "What do we do now?" "Whatever feels right. There is no rush, no timeline we have to follow. We just take this one day at a time, one day at a time." It sounded manageable, almost hopeful. Winter gave way to spring, and with it came new growth, both in the garden and in Eleanor's heart. She and Owen continued their work on the property, but now there was an added dimension to their partnership. They were courting, though not in any traditional sense. There were no formal visits or chaperones. Instead, there were stolen moments, hands held while walking to the garden, smiles exchanged across the breakfast table, conversations that stretched late into the night. Eleanor sewed herself a new dress from the blue fabric Owen had given her. When she wore it for the first time, his eyes lit up in a way that made her feel beautiful, something she had not felt in years. "You are stunning," he said simply. She blushed like a girl, unused to such direct compliments. "It is just a dress." "It is not just a dress. And even if you were wearing rags, you would still be the most beautiful woman I have ever seen." Such declarations became more common as they grew comfortable with their feelings. Owen was not shy about expressing his affection, and Eleanor found herself slowly learning to accept it, to believe that she might actually deserve it. In March, Owen rode into town and returned with a milk cow, a gentle creature he named Bessie. "For the future," he said, and Eleanor understood he meant not just the property's future but theirs. They had not yet discussed marriage, but it hung in the air between them, an unspoken possibility. Eleanor knew that tongues in town were wagging more vigorously now. She and Owen made no secret of their closeness, and while they maintained separate sleeping arrangements, it was clear to anyone with eyes that they were far more than employer and employee. One evening in late April, as they sat outside watching the sunset, Owen said, "I have been thinking about something." "What is that?" "You, me, our future." He turned to face her fully. "Eleanor, I know it has not been a full year since Thomas passed. I know society says you should wait longer. But I also know that life is short and uncertain, and I do not want to waste time pretending I am anything other than completely in love with you." Her heart hammered in her chest. "Owen, what are you saying?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band. "I am saying I want to marry you. I want to build a life with you, a real life. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to work this land with you, raise children with you if you are willing, grow old with you." He held out the ring. "Will you marry me, Eleanor Walsh? Will you let me carry your heart and promise to never drop it?" The words were perfect, addressing her deepest fear, that whoever she gave her heart to would carelessly let it fall and shatter. But Owen was not careless. He had proven himself steady and true, someone who honored his commitments and treated her with respect and tenderness. "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and then he was kissing her for the first time, gentle and sweet and full of promise. Eleanor kissed him back, pouring into it all the affection and hope she had been holding back. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "I love you," she said, the words feeling both familiar and brand new. "I love you too. So much." They married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Vulture City. Eleanor wore her blue dress, and Owen wore his best clothes, cleaned and pressed. There were few witnesses, just the preacher and a couple who ran the general store. But it did not matter. What mattered was the vows they spoke, the promises they made to love and honor each other through whatever came. That night, in the house that was now truly theirs together, Owen carried Eleanor over the threshold. They had expanded the single room into 2, with a proper bedroom that offered privacy. He set her down gently and cupped her face in his hands. "Are you happy?" he asked. "I am," she said, surprised to find it was true. "For the first time in longer than I can remember, I am genuinely happy." "Good. That is all I want, your happiness." They made love that night, a tender and intimate joining that sealed their commitment in the most profound way. Eleanor had been nervous, but Owen was patient and gentle, taking his time, making sure she felt cherished and safe. Afterward, lying in his arms, she felt a peace she had not known was possible. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what? For finding me, for staying. For loving me despite everything." Owen pressed a kiss to her forehead. "You have it backward. Thank you for letting me in, for giving me a purpose and a home, for teaching me that the past does not have to define the future." Over the following months, they built their life together with intention and care. The property flourished under their combined efforts. The garden produced abundantly, the chickens laid steadily, and Bessie provided rich milk that Eleanor learned to make into butter and cheese to sell in town. Owen took occasional work breaking horses for ranchers in the area, earning good money with his skills. They saved carefully, planning for the future. By late summer, Eleanor suspected she was pregnant. The signs were subtle at first: a missed cycle, unusual fatigue, a slight queasiness in the mornings. She waited to be sure before telling Owen, afraid to hope too much. But when her suspicions were confirmed by the doctor in town, she could not contain her joy. She told Owen that evening, unable to keep the secret even a few hours longer. "I am with child," she said simply. Owen's face transformed, joy and wonder washing over his features. "Truly, truly. The doctor says it will be late winter or early spring." He picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing. When he set her down, his eyes were suspiciously bright. "A baby, our baby. Eleanor, this is the best news I have ever received. You are happy then?" "Happy does not begin to cover it. I am overjoyed, I am awed, I am terrified." He placed a gentle hand on her still flat stomach. "We are going to be parents." The reality of it settled over them both, weighty and wonderful. They spent the evening making plans, discussing names, imagining the future. Eleanor felt a happiness so profound it almost hurt. She had gone from despair and isolation to this, to love and family and hope. It seemed impossible, like something from a dream, but the old guilt still whispered in quiet moments. She had failed Thomas, had ended his life prematurely. Did she really deserve this new happiness? Did she deserve Owen's love and a child to raise? As if sensing her thoughts, Owen said, "You are thinking about Thomas." It was not a question. "How did you know?" "Because I know you. And I know that guilt does not disappear just because good things happen." "But Eleanor, you have to let yourself have this. You have to let yourself be happy without punishing yourself for the past." "I am trying. I know you are. And I will remind you as many times as you need. You deserve this. You deserve happiness and love and a family. Thomas would want that for you. He would not want you to spend your life in mourning and self-flagellation." Eleanor knew he was right. Thomas had been a kind man, and he would indeed have wanted her to move on, to find joy again. It was her own harsh judgment that kept her chained to the past. "You are right," she said finally. "I am going to try to be better about that, to accept that I can be imperfect and still worthy of good things. That is all I ask." As Eleanor's pregnancy progressed, Owen became even more attentive and protective. He took on the heavier chores, insisted she rest more, and fretted over her health with an earnestness that was endearing. Eleanor assured him repeatedly that she was fine, that pregnancy was natural and she was strong, but his concern came from love, and she could not fault him for that. In October, a traveling photographer came through Vulture City. Owen insisted they have their picture taken, wanting to capture this moment in their lives. Eleanor agreed, and they dressed in their best clothes and stood before the camera, Owen's hand on her shoulder, her hand resting on her gently rounded stomach. The resulting photograph showed a young couple, serious as was custom for photographs, but with an unmistakable warmth in their eyes. Winter arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and occasional rain. Eleanor's body changed and grew, accommodating the life within her. She felt the baby move for the first time in November, a flutter like butterfly wings. When she told Owen, he placed his hands on her belly and waited patiently until he felt it too. The wonder on his face was something she would remember forever. Christmas of 1882 was their first as a married couple. Owen cut a small pine tree and brought it into the house, and Eleanor decorated it with strings of dried berries and bits of ribbon. They exchanged simple gifts. She gave him a new shirt she had sewn, and he gave her a rocking chair he had built himself, explaining that she would need it for the baby. "It is perfect," she said, running her hands over the smooth wood. "You made this." "I did. I wanted you to have something special, something made with love." She kissed him then, deeply and thoroughly, trying to convey with actions what words could not fully express. As her due date approached, Eleanor grew both excited and anxious. She had attended a birth once and knew it was painful and potentially dangerous. Women died in childbirth regularly, and while she tried not to dwell on that fact, it lurked in the back of her mind. Owen must have sensed her fear because one evening he said, "You are worried about the birth." "I am," she admitted. "What if something goes wrong? What if I am not strong enough?" "You are the strongest person I know. But even if you are afraid, I will be here, right outside the door if the midwife will not let me in the room, holding your hand if she will. You will not go through this alone." His words provided some comfort, though the fear remained. All she could do was wait and trust that her body would do what it was designed to do. In late February, labor began in the early morning hours. Eleanor woke to a tightening in her belly, regular and insistent. She roused Owen, who immediately rode into town to fetch the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Henderson. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the day and into the night. Eleanor had never experienced such pain, waves of it that seemed to tear her apart. Mrs. Henderson remained calm and encouraging, and true to his word, Owen stayed close. When Mrs. Henderson finally allowed him in the room, he sat beside Eleanor and let her grip his hand hard enough to bruise. "You can do this," he murmured during a brief respite between contractions. "You are doing so well." "It hurts," she gasped. "I know, my love, I know, but soon we will have our baby. Soon this will be over and it will all be worth it." She wanted to believe him, but in that moment, consumed by pain, it was hard to think beyond the immediate suffering. Still, she drew strength from his presence, from the steadiness of his voice. Finally, as dawn broke on a new day, Mrs. Henderson commanded, "Push now, push hard." Eleanor bore down with everything she had left, and suddenly the pressure released. A sharp cry filled the room, thin and reedy but unmistakably alive. "It is a boy," Mrs. Henderson announced, holding up a squirming, red-faced infant. "A healthy boy." Eleanor collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted beyond measure but flooded with relief and joy. Owen was crying openly, staring at his son with an expression of absolute wonder. Mrs. Henderson cleaned the baby and placed him in Eleanor's arms. She looked down at the tiny face, at the small fists waving in the air, and felt her heart expand in a way she had not known was possible. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We have been waiting for you." Owen leaned over, looking at his son with reverence. "He is perfect, absolutely perfect." They had discussed names and had settled on Oliver after Owen's grandfather. Oliver Thomas Lawson, the second name honoring Eleanor's late husband. It felt right, a way of acknowledging the past while embracing the future. The weeks that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and overwhelming love. Oliver was a good baby, healthy and growing steadily. Eleanor marveled at his tiny fingers and toes, at the way he would grasp her thumb with surprising strength, at the soft sounds he made while sleeping. Owen proved to be a devoted father. He would walk with Oliver when the baby was fussy, speaking to him in a low, soothing voice. He changed nappies without complaint and helped Eleanor when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her. Watching him with their son, Eleanor fell even more deeply in love with her husband. Spring arrived, bringing renewal to the land and to their lives. The garden was planted, the animals tended, and slowly they adjusted to their new reality as parents. Eleanor's body healed, though she bore the marks of childbirth, and she found herself more confident in her maternal abilities. One warm April evening, with Oliver asleep in his cradle, Eleanor and Owen sat outside watching the sunset. It had become their ritual, this quiet time together at the end of each day. "I have been thinking," Eleanor said, "about everything that has happened. About how different my life is now compared to 2 years ago. Better, I hope, immeasurably better. When Thomas died, I thought my life was over. I thought I would spend whatever years I had left alone and miserable, punishing myself for what I had done. I never imagined this. You, Oliver, this life we have built, it seems too good to be true." Owen reached over and took her hand. "It is true, though, it is real, and you do not have to feel guilty for being happy. I know, and the guilt, it is less now, still there sometimes, but not crushing like it used to be. You help me see that I am allowed to forgive myself, that I am allowed to move forward. You did that work yourself. I just walked beside you." She smiled and squeezed his hand. "You did more than that. You loved me when I could not love myself. You saw something in me worth saving. Because there was and is so much worth saving. You are remarkable, Eleanor Lawson. You have taken tragedy and guilt and turned them into purpose and love. You have built a life from ashes. That takes courage. We built it together." "Yes, we did." They sat in comfortable silence, watching as the sky turned from orange to pink to purple. From inside the house came a small cry, and Eleanor rose to tend to their son. As she lifted Oliver from his cradle and held him close, she felt a contentment so complete it brought tears to her eyes. This was her life now. Not the life she had planned or expected, but perhaps the life she was always meant to have. She had walked through the valley of grief and guilt and emerged on the other side, not unscathed but stronger. She had learned that she was capable of resilience, that she could survive loss and still find joy. And she had Owen, her partner, her love, the man who had promised to carry her heart and never drop it. He had kept that promise every day since, treating her with a gentleness and respect that never wavered. As the months passed, their family settled into a rhythm. Owen's horse-breaking skills became well known in the region, and he earned good money at it. Eleanor continued her sewing work, though less intensively now that she had Oliver to care for. They saved money steadily, planning for the future, for the time when Oliver would need schooling and more. By Oliver's first birthday, they had expanded the house again, adding a separate room for him. It was a modest space, but Eleanor decorated it with care, making curtains and a quilt in cheerful colors. Owen built a small bed, beautifully crafted with protective rails. The party they threw for Oliver's birthday was small but joyful. A few neighbors came, including the couple from the general store who had witnessed their wedding. There was cake and laughter, and Oliver, understanding none of it but delighted by the attention, grinned and clapped his chubby hands. "To our son," Owen said, raising a cup of cider. "May he grow up knowing he is loved and valued. May he have courage and kindness in equal measure." "To Oliver," the assembled guests echoed. Eleanor looked around at the people gathered in their home, at the food on the table, at her healthy son, at her husband's smiling face. This was happiness. This was what she had thought she would never have again. That night, after the guests had left and Oliver was asleep, Eleanor and Owen stood in their bedroom, tired but content. "Thank you for today," Eleanor said, "for making it special. It was my pleasure. Though I think you did most of the work with the food and decorations," she smiled. "It was a team effort like everything else we do." Owen pulled her close, his arms warm and secure around her. "I love our team. I do too." He kissed her then, slow and deep, and Eleanor responded with enthusiasm. Their physical relationship had returned after Oliver's birth, and if anything, it had grown richer and more intimate. There was a comfort now, a knowing of each other's bodies and preferences, combined with a continued sense of discovery. As months turned into years, their life continued to flourish. Oliver grew into a bright, energetic boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's quick mind. Eleanor became pregnant again when Oliver was 3, and this time the birth was easier, producing a daughter they named Emma Grace. She had Owen's eyes and Eleanor's stubborn chin, and from the moment she entered the world, she had her father wrapped around her tiny finger. Owen doted on both his children, but had a special softness for his daughter. He would carry her everywhere, pointing out birds and flowers, teaching her the names of things even when she was too young to understand. Eleanor watched these interactions with a full heart, grateful that her children would grow up knowing a father's love. By 1888, 7 years after Eleanor and Owen had first met, Vulture City had grown substantially. More families had arrived, drawn by mining opportunities and the promise of land. Eleanor had become friends with several other women, finding acceptance and community she had never experienced before. Her past was known, but it no longer defined her. She was Mrs. Lawson, wife and mother, respected member of the community. The property had also grown. They now had several cows, a large flock of chickens, 2 pigs, and a vegetable garden that produced more than they could use, allowing them to sell the surplus. Owen had built a proper workshop where Eleanor could sew, with good light and space for her materials. They had even purchased an adjacent plot of land, expanding their holdings and their possibilities. One evening, as they celebrated their 7th wedding anniversary, Owen presented Eleanor with a gift wrapped in brown paper. "What is this?" she asked, curious. "Open it and see." She carefully unwrapped the package to find a leather-bound journal, beautiful and clearly expensive. "I thought you might like to write down our story," Owen explained. "For the children, for their children someday, so they know where they came from, what we overcame, how we built this life." Eleanor ran her fingers over the smooth leather, moved by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "This is wonderful, thank you. Will you do it? Write it all down." "I will, though I am not sure I can do justice to everything we have experienced. Just tell the truth. That is all anyone can ask." So Eleanor began to write, filling the pages with their story. She wrote about Thomas and the guilt she carried. She wrote about the day Owen appeared and started fixing her fence. She wrote about falling in love, about learning to forgive herself, about the joy of building a family. She wrote honestly, holding nothing back, creating a record for future generations. The act of writing proved cathartic. Putting words on paper helped Eleanor process the journey she had taken, from the depths of despair to the heights of happiness. She realized as she wrote that her story was not just about finding love again. It was about redemption, about learning that mistakes did not make someone irredeemable, about choosing to live fully even after tragedy. In the spring of 1889, Eleanor became pregnant for a 3rd time. This pregnancy was more difficult, leaving her exhausted and uncomfortable. Owen worried constantly, but Eleanor assured him she was fine, that this was just how some pregnancies were. Their 3rd child, Another son they named Oscar Daniel was born in late autumn. The birth was harder than the previous two, and there were moments when Eleanor genuinely feared she might not survive. But Mrs. Henderson, still practicing midwifery despite her advancing age, guided her through, and eventually Eleanor held another healthy baby. "That is it," Owen declared when he saw how depleted Eleanor was after the birth. "No more children. I cannot watch you go through this again. 3 is perfect." Eleanor was too tired to argue, though secretly she agreed. 3 children felt complete, their family exactly the right size. Oscar proved to be a quieter baby than his siblings, content to observe the world with solemn eyes. Oliver, now a responsible 8-year-old, took his role as big brother seriously, always making sure Emma did not get into too much trouble and helping watch Oscar when Eleanor needed extra hands. The years continued to pass, marked by the small milestones of family life. First teeth, first steps, first words. Birthdays and holidays, illnesses and recoveries, arguments and reconciliations. Through it all, Eleanor and Owen remained deeply in love, their bond strengthening with each shared experience. When Oliver turned 10, he expressed an interest in learning to work with horses like his father. Owen was thrilled and began teaching his son everything he knew. Eleanor watched them together in the corral, seeing so much of Owen in their boy, and felt profound gratitude for the life they had created. Emma, at 7, showed a talent for sewing and spent hours at Eleanor's side, learning stitches and techniques. She chattered constantly while she worked, her bright personality filling the workshop with energy. Eleanor loved these moments with her daughter, passing down skills and creating memories. Oscar, at 5, was the dreamer of the family. He loved stories and would beg Eleanor to read to him for hours. He also had a gift for drawing, creating elaborate pictures with whatever materials he could find. Owen built him a small desk where he could work, and Oscar spent happy hours there, lost in his imagination. In 1895, 14 years after they first met, Eleanor and Owen celebrated not just their wedding anniversary, but the anniversary of the day he had shown up and fixed her fence. It had become a private celebration between them, a way of acknowledging how far they had come. They took a rare evening alone, the children staying with neighbors, and rode out to a spot overlooking Vulture City. The town had continued to grow, though the mining boom was slowing. Many predicted the town would eventually fade, but for now, it remained their home. "Do you ever think about leaving?" Eleanor asked as they sat on a blanket watching the stars emerge. "Going somewhere bigger with more opportunities for the children?" Owen considered before answering. "Sometimes, but this is where we built our life. This is where we fell in love, where our children were born. It would be hard to leave all that history behind." "I feel the same way. Besides, the children are happy here. They have friends and space to grow. That matters more than the size of the town." "Agreed." He pulled her closer, and she rested her head on his shoulder. "Can I tell you something? Always. Sometimes I still cannot believe you chose me, that you let me into your life and your heart. I wake up some mornings and have to remind myself that this is real, that you are mine and I am yours." Eleanor lifted her head to look at him. "I should be the one saying that. You saved me, Owen, not in some dramatic way, but in the quiet, steady way that matters most. You gave me a reason to keep going when I had none. You loved me when I could not love myself. You kept your promise." "What promise?" "To carry my heart and never drop it. You have held it carefully every single day." Owen's eyes were bright with emotion. "And I always will. Until my last breath I will love you and cherish you. That is my vow, made not just on our wedding day but every day since." They kissed under the stars, Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from their shared pain and hope. As they rode home that night, Eleanor thought about the journal Owen had given her years ago. She had filled it completely and started a second one, documenting not just the dramatic moments but the everyday joys of their life. She wanted her children to know that happiness was not about grand gestures or perfect circumstances. It was about choosing love, day after day. It was about forgiveness, both of others and of oneself. It was about resilience and hope and the courage to keep moving forward even when the path was unclear. The years continued their march forward. Oliver grew into a fine young man, skilled with horses and kind like his father. At 18, he began courting a girl from a neighboring ranch, and Eleanor saw in him the promise of future happiness. Emma, at 15, had become a talented seamstress, her work surpassing even Eleanor's. She talked about opening her own dress shop someday, and Eleanor had no doubt she would succeed. Oscar, at 13, remained the family dreamer. He had started writing stories, filling notebooks with tales of adventure and heroism. Owen encouraged this pursuit, even though it was not a typical path for a boy in Arizona. Eleanor was now in her early 40s, her hair showing threads of silver, her face bearing the lines of a life fully lived. She was proud of those lines, each one earned through laughter or worry or deep thought. She was not the same woman who had stood at Thomas's grave all those years ago, crushed by guilt and despair. She had been transformed by love and time and hard-won wisdom. Owen, too, had aged, though Eleanor thought he looked even more handsome with gray at his temples. He still worked hard, but they had hired help now, a young man named Peter who lived in a small cottage they had built on the property. This gave Owen more time to spend with the children, teaching them and preparing them for their own futures. One evening in the late spring of 1900, as Eleanor was finishing up in the kitchen, Owen came to her with a serious expression. "I have been thinking about something," he said. "A trip for just the two of us." Eleanor was surprised. "A trip? Where?" "San Francisco. I know it is far, but I have always wanted to see the ocean, and I think you might like the city. We could take the train, be gone maybe 2 weeks. Your friend Martha said she would look after the children." The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. Eleanor had never been farther from Vulture City than Phoenix, but the thought of an adventure with Owen, of seeing new places together, was appealing. 2 weeks is a long time to be away from the children, she said, though she was already warming to the idea. They are old enough now. Oliver is 20, he can manage things here, and it would be good for us to have time alone, do you not think? She smiled. You are right. Let us do it. Let us go see the ocean. They made the trip that summer, and it was everything Eleanor had hoped. The train journey was long but fascinating, passing through landscapes she had only read about. San Francisco was overwhelming in its size and noise, but also beautiful and exciting. And the ocean, when she finally saw it, took her breath away. They stood on the beach hand in hand, watching waves crash against the shore. The immensity of the water, the rhythmic roar of the surf, the salt smell in the air, it was all magnificent and humbling. "Thank you for this," Eleanor said. "For giving me this experience." "Thank you for agreeing to come," Owen replied, "for being willing to try new things even after all these years. I would go anywhere with you, and I with you." They spent 2 glorious weeks exploring the city, eating in restaurants, visiting museums, walking along the waterfront. It was a second honeymoon, a chance to reconnect as a couple rather than just as parents. Eleanor was reminded of why she had fallen in love with Owen in the first place. His curiosity, his kindness, his ability to find joy in simple things. When they returned home, tanned and tired but happy, their children greeted them enthusiastically. The house was still standing. Nothing terrible had happened, and Eleanor realized that her babies were truly growing up, becoming independent. Life continued its pattern through the turn of the century. In 1902, Oliver married his sweetheart in a beautiful ceremony. Eleanor cried through the entire event, overwhelmed by the passage of time and the joy of seeing her son so happy. Owen gave a toast that had everyone laughing and crying simultaneously, speaking about love and commitment and the importance of treating your partner with respect. Emma announced her engagement the following year to a young man who worked as a clerk in the general store. He was steady and kind, and while Eleanor had hoped her talented daughter might pursue her business ambitions before settling down, she could see Emma was genuinely happy. Oscar, surprising everyone, received a scholarship to attend a small college in California, his writing having impressed one of the teachers who passed through Vulture City. It was both thrilling and heartbreaking to send him off, but Eleanor was proud beyond measure. With all three children launched into their own lives, Eleanor and Owen found themselves adjusting to an empty house. It was strange at first, after 20 years of children underfoot, to have only each other again. But they adapted, rediscovering the quiet intimacy of their early years together. They still worked the property, though less intensively now. They had enough money saved, and the land produced steady income without requiring backbreaking labor. They spent more time simply being together, talking, reading, taking long walks in the desert they had called home for so long. One evening, as they sat in the rocking chairs Owen had made years ago, Eleanor said, "We did well, did we not? With the children, with this life." "We did extraordinarily well," Owen agreed. "I could not be prouder of who they have become. They are good people, kind, hardworking, honest. That is what matters most." "They learned that from watching you, from watching us both," Eleanor corrected. "We were a team, remember, always." They rocked in comfortable silence, the desert evening settling around them. Eleanor thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The loss, the guilt, the slow climb back to hope, the unexpected arrival of a cowboy who had seen something in her worth saving, the love that had grown between them, steady and true, the children they had raised, the life they had built. It was not the life she had imagined when she married Thomas Walsh all those years ago. It was better, richer, more fulfilling in ways she had not known to want. She had learned that happiness was possible even after tragedy, that forgiveness was a gift you gave yourself, that love could heal even the deepest wounds. "What are you thinking about?" Owen asked, noticing her expression. "Everything. How much has changed, how grateful I am for all of it. Even the hard parts, especially the hard parts. They taught me, shaped me, brought me to you. I would not change anything, not if it meant losing this." Owen reached over and took her hand, his grip still strong despite the years. "I love you, Eleanor Lawson. More now than even on the day we married, if that is possible." "It is possible. I love you too, more than words can express." The years continued to unfold gently. Grandchildren arrived, filling the house with noise and joy during visits. Oliver and his wife had 3 children. Emma had 2. And Oscar, surprising everyone by marrying a fellow writer he met in California, had 1 daughter who inherited his creative spirit. Eleanor delighted in being a grandmother, spoiling her grandchildren in ways she had not spoiled her own children. She made them treats, told them stories, sewed them special clothes. Owen built them toys and taught them about animals and plants, passing down his knowledge to another generation. In 1915, as Eleanor approached her 60th birthday, she reflected on the fullness of her life. She had lived through so much, had experienced such extremes of emotion. From the guilt and despair that had nearly destroyed her to the love and joy that had rebuilt her, She had run the gamut of human experience. She was older now, her body showing the wear of years of hard work and multiple pregnancies. But she was healthy and strong, and more importantly, she was content. The guilt that had once dominated her thoughts appeared only rarely now, a quiet whisper rather than a constant shout. She had learned to carry it without letting it crush her, to acknowledge her mistake while not letting it define her entire existence. Owen, too, had aged, his hair now fully gray, his movements a bit slower. But his eyes still lit up when he looked at her, and his love remained as constant as the rising sun. They celebrated her 60th birthday with all their children and grandchildren present. The house overflowed with people and laughter. 3 generations gathered to honor the woman who had survived so much and built so much. When the party wound down and everyone had gone to bed, Eleanor and Owen sat outside under the stars, as they had done countless times before. 60 years, Eleanor mused. I never imagined I would live to see this age. You will live many more years yet, Owen said confidently. You are too stubborn to do otherwise, she laughed. Perhaps, but even if I do not, I have no regrets. This life we have lived, it has been extraordinary. It has been, Owen agreed. And it is not over yet. We still have time, still have more memories to make. What shall we do with that time? Whatever we want. We have earned the right to be selfish with our remaining years. They talked about possibilities, about maybe traveling more, about writing down more of their stories for the grandchildren, about simply enjoying each day as it came. The future was uncertain, but it always had been. The key was facing it together, as they had faced everything else. As the night deepened and the air grew cool, they finally went inside. In their bedroom, with its comfortable bed and familiar surroundings, they prepared for sleep. Owen held Eleanor close, and she felt the steady beat of his heart against her back. Thank you, she whispered. For what, my love? For keeping your promise, for carrying my heart all these years and never dropping it, for loving me through everything. It was the easiest promise I ever kept, Owen replied, pressing a kiss to her hair. Loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life. They fell asleep that way, wrapped in each other's arms, 2 hearts beating in synchrony after decades of practice. The years that followed were peaceful and full. Eleanor and Owen grew old together, their love deepening with each passing season. They watched their grandchildren grow, celebrated births and marriages, mourned the inevitable losses that came with age. Through it all, they remained each other's constant, each other's comfort. In 1925, on their 43rd wedding anniversary, they renewed their vows in a small ceremony attended by family. Both were in their 70s now, their bodies showing the inevitable decline of age, but their spirits remained strong, their love undimmed. I, Owen, take you, Eleanor, to be my wife, Owen said, his voice wavering slightly but filled with conviction. Again and always, I promise to love you, honor you, and carry your heart with care until my last breath. I, Eleanor, take you, Owen, to be my husband, Eleanor replied, tears streaming down her weathered face. Again and always. Thank you for saving me, for loving me, for giving me this beautiful life. I promise to love you fiercely and completely until the end of my days. They sealed their renewed vows with a kiss, and their family cheered, moved by the depth of devotion they witnessed. As Eleanor sat at the celebration afterward, surrounded by children and grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren, she felt overwhelmed by gratitude. She had been given a second chance at life, at love, at happiness. She had taken that chance and built something magnificent. The guilt she had once carried so heavily had transformed over the years. It was still there, a part of her story, but it no longer controlled her. She had learned to hold it alongside the joy, to acknowledge both the mistakes she had made and the good she had done. She had learned that being human meant being imperfect, and that imperfection did not negate worthiness. She looked over at Owen, who was holding one of their great-grandchildren and making silly faces that had the child giggling uncontrollably. This man, who had appeared in her life when she needed him most, who had loved her without reservation, who had kept his promise every single day. He was her greatest gift, the answer to prayers she had not known how to speak. As if feeling her gaze, Owen looked up and smiled at her. Even after all these years, that smile still made her heart flutter. She smiled back, pouring all her love into the expression, and saw her feelings reflected in his eyes. They had made it. Through grief and guilt, through struggle and hardship, through the ordinary challenges of building a life together. They had made it to the other side, to this place of peace and fulfillment. They had created a legacy of love that would continue through generations, through the children and grandchildren they had raised with care and intention. As the sun set on their anniversary celebration, painting the Arizona sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Eleanor felt a profound sense of completion. This was what it meant to live fully, to embrace both the pain and the joy, to choose love even when it was frightening. She had been the widow who carried guilt, convinced she was beyond redemption. He had been the cowboy who carried her heart and promised to never drop it. Together, they had built something that transcended their individual stories, something beautiful and lasting and true. And as they walked hand in hand toward their home, the place where they had built their life brick by brick and moment by moment, Eleanor knew that no matter what remained of their time together, it would be enough. Because they had loved well and fully, and in the end, that was all that truly mattered. The evening stars began to appear in the darkening sky, constant and bright, much like the love that had guided them through 43 years of marriage. Inside their home, as Owen helped Eleanor remove her shoes and they settled into their familiar routine, there was a sense of rightness, of having lived a story worth telling. Eleanor thought of the journal she had kept, now multiple volumes documenting their journey. She thought of how she would write about this day, about renewing their vows, about the fullness of a life well lived. Future generations would read those words and know that love was worth fighting for, that redemption was possible, that the human heart had an infinite capacity for healing and growth. As they prepared for bed, moving slowly but with the ease of long practice, Owen said, "Do you know what I am most proud of?" "What is that?" "Not the property we built or the children we raised, though those are wonderful achievements. What I am most proud of is that I kept my promise. I carried your heart and I never dropped it, not once in all these years." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. "You did keep it. You held it carefully and protected it and helped it heal. I do not know who I would have been without you, but I know I would not have been happy." "We saved each other," Owen said simply. "You gave me purpose and a home. I gave you hope and a future. It was always meant to be this way." They climbed into bed, and despite the aches and pains that came with age, they still curled together as they always had. Eleanor rested her head on Owen's chest, listening to his heartbeat, that steady rhythm that had been her anchor for so long. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," he replied. "Today, tomorrow, and for whatever time we have left. Always." They drifted off to sleep that way, two souls intertwined, two hearts beating as one. Outside, the desert night wrapped around their home, protective and familiar. The stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance, marking the passage of time and the constancy of love. In the months and years that followed, Owen and Eleanor continued their life together with the same devotion they had always shown. They grew frailer, their steps slower, their bodies less reliable, but their love never wavered, never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger, distilled down to its purest essence by the passage of time. They spent their days in simple pleasures, sitting together in the sunshine, tending a small garden, receiving visits from family, sharing meals and memories. They talked about everything and nothing, comfortable in the silence that came after 45, then 50 years together. On a warm spring evening in 1932, 50 years after they had married, Eleanor and Owen sat on their porch watching the sunset. Both were in their late 70s now, their movements slow but their minds sharp. 50 years, Eleanor marveled, half a century together. The best 50 years of my life, Owen said, though I hope we have a few more yet to come, as do I. But Owen, if we do not, if something happens to one of us, I want you to know something. What is that, my love? You saved my life. Not in some abstract way, but truly, literally saved me. I was drowning in guilt and despair, and you threw me a rope. You gave me a reason to keep living, to keep trying. Everything good that has happened since, our children, our grandchildren, all the joy and love, it would not have existed without you. So thank you. Thank you for fixing my fence that day, for staying, for loving me despite everything. Owen's eyes were wet as he took her hand. Eleanor, you saved me too. I was drifting, purposeless, haunted by my own demons. You gave me a home and a family and a reason to be better. You taught me about resilience and forgiveness. You are the strongest, most remarkable person I have ever known, and I am honored, every single day, that you chose to spend your life with me. They held each other as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a love that had lasted a lifetime. Whatever time remained to them, they would face it together, as they had faced everything else. And when the end did come, as it eventually must for everyone, they would go knowing they had lived fully, loved deeply, and left a legacy that would endure through generations. They had proved that the darkest moments could give way to the brightest joy, that guilt could be transformed into grace, that a broken heart could heal and love again. The widow had learned to release her guilt, to forgive herself, and embrace the beautiful life she had been given. The cowboy had kept his promise, carrying her heart with tender care for more than 50 years, never once letting it fall. Together, they had created something that transcended their individual stories, a testament to the power of love, forgiveness, and human resilience. As the stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky, Eleanor and Owen sat hand in hand, two souls united by fate and sustained by choice, their love a beacon that would shine long after they were gone, guiding future generations toward hope, healing, and the courage to love fully despite the risks. Their story, begun in grief and guilt, had transformed into something beautiful beyond measure, proving that no matter how dark the valley, there was always a path leading toward the light, and sometimes that path came in the form of a cowboy with kind eyes and a promise to never drop the precious heart entrusted to his care.